Welcome to St. Thomas Villanova Church. My name is Father Alan Fitzgerald, the director of the Augustinian Institute. And over the last couple of years, I've had the joy of being able to welcome some scholars from other places to Villanova to be able to not only come and do their research in our midst, but also to give us a bit of their scholarship, interest, love for Augustine, all through the semester. The Thomas F. Martin St. Augustine Fellow this fall is Maureen Tilley from Fordham University. It's nice always to be able to recognize not only a colleague, but also a friend. And Maureen today is going to talk to us about friendship in Augustine, friends and family, best friends forever. The fact that we decided to do it here in St. Thomas Church wasn't to make it look more holy or sacred than it will already be, but we couldn't find a big enough space on campus. And it's nice to know that I was right to choose a space that needed a little bit more because you have come in some number. And I thank all of you for being here. At this point, I'm going to pass the microphone for the videotaping to Maureen. That'll take her a minute to kind of get that all set up. And knowing that when people come to church, they always sit in the back, we decided that she needed a walking mic so she could talk to you, not from back here, but from somewhere closer, as befits a talk on friendship.
Friends are intimate, nothing like the intimacy of getting dressed in front of a whole group of people. To begin, I would like to thank Villanova University and especially members of the Augustinian Institute for the opportunity to spend the semester conversing with faculty who teach the Augustine and Culture Seminar, and to spend some time thinking, reading, and writing about Augustine. My first week here at Villanova was an exciting one. First, there was an earthquake. Now that's all right, I'm from California. Then there was Hurricane Irene, not so okay. On top of that, there was a tornado, a power outage, and water in my basement. Definitely not okay. But the follow-up with the faculty and students has been calmer and more exciting in a good way. So thank you, Father Alan, Anna Misticoni, Dr. Jonathan Yates, and all the people from the Augustinian Institute who have exemplified Augustinian hospitality. I'd like to thank Drs. Barbara Wall and Beth Hassel from the Office for Mission and Ministry who have included me in a lot of their events. Why friendship? I chose friendship for my topic because I think more than any other religious founder, Augustine's work is shot through with themes of friendship, sometimes articulated as such, and at others lying just below the surface. Any reader of the Confessions will recognize the pervasiveness of friendship, especially in books 2 and 4. Augustine was shamed by his exploit of stealing pears. He was puzzled at the strong emotions he felt at the death of a friend. Friendship grew. Friendship colored his relationships, sometimes made him do things he wouldn't have already done. He wandered through his studies in philosophy, the Manichae religion, and finally Christianity, all in the company of friends. Bubbling beneath the surface are other aspects of friendship. More than any other religious rule, more than the Franciscans, Dominicans, Jesuits, Carmelites, or others, the Augustinian rule is based on Augustine's experience of living with friends. So all in all, friendship seems to be a real Augustinian theme. Yet I don't want to go too mushy on you and say friendship is never problematic. Augustinian best friends forever are not like a South Park episode of the same title, and it's not like some chick lit novel. No, Augustine's idea of best friends forever is complex and challenging. But before we get to the complexities and challenges of friendship, I want you to recall 3 to 5 friends. If you're taking notes, write them down. So I'm going to stop at various times to give you time to write things, to think about things, but just write down 3 to 5 people you would call friends. If you're not taking notes, recall them. You don't have to let the person next to you see who they are. Include in this list one person whom you once were friends with, whom you are no longer friends with. And not just because they moved away, an ex-friend. Somebody where something happened and you're no longer friends. Okay? Because I know some of you are taking notes for class, I'm going to give you the outline now so you can trace where we are. First, it's going to be what is friendship? Modern. What is friendship? Ancient. Augustine and friends. Naming friends. Evaluating friends, and then a conclusion. And each time I go from one section to another, I'll kind of announce this is where we are. So what is friendship modern? When I was growing up, the word friend was not used lightly. We had a variety of words for a spectrum of people we knew, from somebody I know to the most intimate. And there are going to be 5 categories here. People I know, acquaintances, ACQ, companions, friends, and best friends. So that's people I know, acquaintances, companions, friends, and best friends. People I know. Okay, these are people I know something about. I don't have any particularly strong links to them or they to me. We recognize each other on the street. We could greet each other by name. But there's no affective or emotional bonds here. If we don't see each other for a while, it's no big deal. If we never saw each other, it might be sad because a friendship never blossomed, but let's get real. In a sense, you just can't be friends with everybody, not at the same degree. So that's people I know. I would not have called these people friends. Second, acquaintances. Acquaintances are the next level up in the ladder of friendship. They're people we know something about. We are acquainted with them. Their likes, their dislikes, where they live, with whom they associate. We know more about them than people I know, but there's still no strong affective bonds. If they were injured or died, we might feel sorry for them or their family, but there would be no intense longing to see them again, no ache in the heart for their absence. Third, companions. The word comes from people we break bread with. These are people with whom we've had a shared experience, sometimes good, sometimes bad. But the experiences are always bonding experiences. Some of these people may become friends or best friends, or when the experience is over, this great bonding experience, they may slip back into the categories of acquaintances or people I once knew. Companions can go either up or down the friendship scale. Next category, friends. Friends are people you know a lot about. You share a lot. Perhaps you went to elementary school together, or they lived on your block and you played together. Maybe your parents and their parents are friends. They're part of your day-to-day world, even if you don't see them regularly because they've moved away. Even then, they're in the background of life. You shared moments that stand out at the oddest time. You hear their favorite song and think of them. When you go to a restaurant where you were with them some late night, they're almost there in the thought world. Their memory seems to linger in the room. When you can, you stay in touch. And if you haven't stayed in touch, their present absence may mark your world for a long time. Then there are best friends. Best friends are restricted in number. They aren't as many as friends or acquaintances. And they're not just restricted in number, they're also restricted in the kind of exposure you let them have and they give to you. There are things that only you can only tell them, and things they can only tell you. They can't tell their parents, they can't tell their best boyfriend, girlfriend in a romantic relationship until that boyfriend, girlfriend replaces best friends. So take that list you have. What kind of friend are the 3 to 5 people you wrote down? Look at your list. Are they people you know, companions, acquaintances, friends, best friends? Okay, what is friendship ancient? In Augustine's world, there was a lot of thought and writing about friendship. Friendship was a real choice you could make in antiquity. You didn't have a lot of choices. You're born into your family, you're born into your place in society, you're born into your town or village and live most of your life there. You may even be born into your occupation if you, by law or custom, have to take over the occupation of a parent. All this is highly conditioned by society in antiquity, but you get to choose your friends. Augustine chose his friends out of shared experience. Those of you who have read books 2 and 4 of the Confessions, anybody? Okay, good. You know a lot about Augustine's friends and companions. Before I talk about Augustine's friends, I want to spend a little time with theories of friendship in Augustine's world. 2 ancient philosophers influenced theories of friendship in Augustine's world, Plato and Aristotle. They have different views of friendship, and we can see how their different ways of thinking influenced Augustine. First, Plato. And not Plato directly, but Plato mediated through the Roman statesman and philosopher Cicero. For those of you who did not have high school Latin, its joys, its drudgeries, Cicero lived in the 1st century BC. He served in the Roman Senate and was caught up in the political world of Julius Caesar and Antony and Cleopatra. He was murdered by political henchmen, but many of his speeches and letters survived, and they were models for oratory in Augustine's time, and Augustine must have read Cicero's essay on friendship because it survives in outline form in one of his letters, Augustine's letters. In his dialogue De Amicitia, or on friendship, Cicero professes that we are attracted to friends, real, true friends, because they are good people, people of virtue. We are not attracted to our friend because our friend can do something for us. That may happen, but it's neither essential nor the heart of friendship. Friendship is the strongest tie between persons, stronger than family. Friends care for each other to the point, if necessary, that they deny their friend's request. And they may openly criticize them. Your best friend will tell you you're wrong. Your best friend will tell you no when you ask for something that's wrong or simply not good for you. There's no limit to the good that we would do for a friend, and we may even love a friend more than ourselves. Friendships, these true friendships, are not entered lightly, and they may even be difficult to maintain, but they are a joy, says Cicero, and they last forever. Cicero calls them the best gift of heaven. But Cicero recognizes that friendships fall apart. We take different paths. Sometimes it's because a friend ceases to be the best for the other. Imagine what happens to you when your friend beats you out for the only A in class. Or beats you out for the best job. Or for the love of your life. If you can't continue to wish your friend the best, the friendship may be falling apart. So think about your little group of friends. How do they measure up? Enough Plato. Aristotle. Aristotle is much more pragmatic than the ethereal Plato, even when mediated by the Roman politician Cicero. I include Aristotle not necessarily because Augustine would have focused his work on friendship to the same degree as Cicero, but because some of Aristotle's concerns about friendship help us to understand friends in Augustine. Aristotle, in Book 8 of the Nicomachean Ethics, describes several kinds of relationships he's calling friendship, 3 of them. Friendships of pleasure, utility, and virtue. Friendships of pleasure, utility, and virtue. That is true friendship. Friendships of a pleasure are the ones where we feel some affection for a person and want to be close to them because they make us feel good. Here I don't mean morally good, just pleasant. I'm exhilarated when I spend time with this person. I feel warm and pleasant in their company. I want to be with him or her because it feels good. Any of your friends here? Cicero would have rejected this kind of friendship as unworthy, but it was certainly okay for Aristotle. We might say it's okay as a start, because something more might come of it. But in order for something more to come of it, person A, who has befriended person B, the one who makes them feel good, has to start thinking not just of themselves, but of the good of person B. Aristotle thinks this sort of friendship is common among young people. Maybe it's true for you. Were you ever attracted to a person of who became a friend of pleasure, and then the friend moved to a higher level? Aristotle's second category is composed of people who are useful to us, people with whom we have mutual obligations. But as we can imagine, this might degenerate into using a person. Yes, you are my friend. You can get a ride to the city with me. Now, may I borrow your biology book so I don't have to spend $156 on this book they're only going to give me $35 for at the end of the semester? Oh, yes, I'm your friend. Anything you want. Sure. Now, will you help me pledge your sorority or fraternity? I'll be your best friend forever. Aristotle thinks friendships of utility are more common among older folks. I think that's because he's thinking of political jockeying that took place in ancient Greek cities. Who would have been Michelle Bachmann's friend? Or Mitt Romney's? Or Keynes? And why? Maybe he chalks it up to older people because there were no pensions or social security in antiquity, and the elderly had to depend on others for their needs. They may not have found their friends pleasant to be with all the time, but they hang on to them for one reason or another. When a friend can no longer satisfy a need, the friendship is over. You ever heard of friends with benefits? Are the benefits pleasure or utility? Depends on how you think about sex. Aristotle calls his last category perfect friendship. This is the virtuous friendship of equals. If persons are not equals, the temptation always exists for that friendship to slide into utility or pleasure. Incidentally, this is why men and women could not be friends. Aristotle's biology and social customs saw women as naturally inferior to men in physical strength, in emotions and mental abilities, hence there's no real friendship between men and women. And women's friendships, if such existed, did not play into the theories of friendship. True friends were attracted to each other because of the good they saw in each other. Not personal advantage or good for me, but simply good, true good, virtues. They were people who wished each other well and did whatever was necessary for the other person to help to maximize the good, the virtuous in their friend's personal life. They were friends of the style Cicero prized and that Augustine in his mature years found the best kind of friend. I emphasize that it's in his mature years that Augustine settled on this best kind of friendship, the friend he wanted to be. But it was not always this way with Augustine. In what follows, I want to look carefully at the friendships Augustine wrote about. But do keep in mind your friends and whatever classification you have given them, pleasure, utility, or virtue. This part is Augustine and his useful friends. Youthful, not useful. Since most of you have read at least portions of Augustine's Confessions, I want to start there with stories from book 2 and 4. Augustine's first story of friendship takes place when he was 16, his gap year, when his parents couldn't pay his tuition. He had to live at home, no classes, no job, just hanging out. Hanging out with a group of unnamed so-called friends. One day, they set out to rob pears from a tree for the sheer joy of being outlaws. Augustine admits, maybe brags, that he never would have done this except among friends. He did it in a perverted sort of craving for friendship, one of Aristotle's friendships of pleasure, one Cicero and Plato would have disdained. We never hear of these so-called friends again. It seemed to have been a short relationship, and Augustine confesses that in this relationship, something was wrong inside of him. But at the time, he loved lawlessness and found pleasure in it, a pleasure these so-called friends facilitated. When Augustine was able to go back to school, law school this time, he fell in with another group of so-called friends. In their exuberance, they called themselves the wreckers. Augustine did not join them in wrecking, but he found their company pleasurable and just a little disturbing. Like his pear tree friends, Augustine never gives the names of these people. Perhaps there's a little shame here, but Augustine did feel some conceit that he was better than they were. So in the view of the philosophers, this friendship did not involve equals. It could not be true friendship, so Augustine moves on. His first extended story of a single friendship occurs a little later in his life. Augustine describes his friendship with a particular young man, but again, no name. This young man and Augustine had become friends because of shared experience and interests. They grew up together, they played together, they went to school together, they were involved in activities together. Both young men were brought up in Christian households, but neither one was baptized, and neither had any use for religion. Here, perhaps, we have a chance at friendship, at least a friendship of equals who would wish each other well and cultivate some of the good in each other, though admittedly not the highest good. Once Augustine's friend grew very ill. His parents thought he was on his deathbed, so they brought in a priest and had him baptized, even though he was not conscious. Valid baptism, but unusual. When he recovered, Augustine joked about the baptism, but his friend had taken it seriously. The friend was now seriously religious, and Augustine wasn't. He wasn't ready to settle down religiously or any other way, and just as Cicero would have predicted, the friendship began to fall apart. It certainly had been a better friendship than the pear tree people or the wreckers, but this friendship did not endure. Even though they had grown apart, Augustine was miserable when his friend did finally die. There had been some good in the friendship, a good Augustine now mourned. He had a deep sorrow about the death of his friend. Donald Burt put it this way: such a friendship, quote, can bring a deep sorrow, a sorrow not from the affection itself, but from our tendency to pour out on temporal things as though they were eternal. Augustine had emotionally invested in a temporal good, the companionship of his young friend, and that companionship did not last. In retrospect, Augustine said, what was wrong with this friendship. There was something missing in it, something that prevented them from being best friends forever. Augustine confesses, and this is important, no friends are true friends unless you, my God, bind them fast to one another through that love which is sown in our hearts by the Holy Spirit. No friends are true friends unless you, my God, bind them fast to one another through that love which is sown in our hearts by the Holy Spirit. Confessions 4:4. Because Augustine was not ready for a relationship with God, he could not have the true friendship which outlasts time and death. Next, naming friends' names. In all the rest of the first half of the Confessions, Augustine mentions friends, lots of friends, but almost no one in the first half of the Confessions has a name. Yet after his conversion, in Book 8, we have lots more friends, and they all have names. Even his companion of more than a full decade, the mother of his only child, has no name. For years, this fact puzzled many commentators on the Confessions, and in his biography of Augustine, Gary Wills gives her a name, Una, standing for the one and only woman of Augustine's heart. Providing this name seems really jarring to me because it seems so out of character for that part of the Confessions. More recently, Michael P. Foley has come up with what I think is a more satisfactory explanation for Augustine's never naming names. Professor Foley sees the first half of the Confessions as a mirror image for the second half. The break between the first and the second half, anybody want to say where it would be? Where's the big, important break in the Confessions? Yeah, his conversion. Before the conversion, there's lots of disorder. Disorder in the parts of the soul, disorder in the pursuit of worldly gain, and in the pursuit of false wisdom, and significantly, disorder in relationships, especially friendships. After the conversion, there's order in the parts of the soul, in the rejection of worldly ambition, the pursuit of knowledge, and in relationships, now copiously named. His friendships in the latter part of the Confessions are like the true friendships of Cicero and Aristotle. These are friendships of equals. Most are bishops like Augustine. They cared about each other through their mutual care for a common pursuit, the cultivation of goodness in the church. Each of these later friendships seems to include the partner missing in the earlier part of the Confessions. That is, no friends are true friends unless you, my God, bind them fast. Emblematic of this sort of friendship is his friendship with Alypius. If you turn around here, this last big stained glass window has the guy on the right. In the stained glass window, not in the aisle. Guy holding a book with a conical hat. He's not a pope. This is a bishop's hat. And this is Augustine's friend, Alypius. He's one of the rare people who's mentioned by name in the first half of the Confessions. The young man, Alypius, and Augustine knew each other from their youth, from the equivalent of high school and college, although Alypius was a bit younger than Augustine. They both studied law. They both spent some time among the Manichees before being baptized on the same night by St. Ambrose. Ambrose is here. Thank you. It's Augustine's life. Alypius, like Augustine, eventually became a bishop, and the two of them cooperated in organizing regional councils for North African bishops, and they participated in the reform of the African church. When Augustine first speaks of him in the Confessions, and this is before conversion, he says, quote, "He was greatly attached to me because he thought I was a good and learned man, and I was fond of him, because although he was still young, it was quite clear that he had a natural disposition to goodness." This sounds like the philosopher's best and truest friendship, the friendship of virtue. Augustine goes on to describe their errant ways and then stops almost in an aside and adds two comments. The first is, "I had forgotten that I might use my influence with him to prevent him from wasting his talents in his thoughtless, impetuous enthusiasm for futile pastimes." This was going to the arena where brutal sports, including blood sports, brutalized the sensibilities of the fans. And it might look at this point that Augustine had not been the truest friend he might have been. But even before Augustine's conversion, this friendship is starting to blossom into something good. And his second remark makes it clear. "But you, O Lord, who held the reins of all you have created, had not forgotten this man who was one day to be bishop and administer your sacrament to your children. You used me to set him on the right path so that we might recognize that it was all your doing. You used me without your knowledge." This was a true friendship because it somehow encompassed the third partner, God, even though at the time neither Augustine nor Alypius knew it. In their relationship, we hear the echo of this true friendship. Next, evaluating friendships and family relations. This is going to be the longer part. So take a break now and think about your friendships. Are you a true friend to those persons you thought about earlier in the talk? Even if God's name is never invoked in your conversations, is God at work in those friendships? Is there room for God to be at work? Are you, at the very basic level, using your influence for the good of the other person? Is their good influence keeping you from wasting your talents? Let's change tack. The title of my talk includes family, so I want to explore whether family, siblings, and parents can be friends. First, a quick look at siblings. Maybe one of your siblings is actually on your first list. They might be friends. They might be pleasurable company. They might be useful. Here I have to tell a story. When I was a kid, I was the oldest child in a family of girls, and I always fantasized if I had an older brother, a brother who would bring home his friends, I might have a better dating life. This was not true friendship, but then I didn't have a true brother. On this point, Augustine's not particularly helpful. We know he had two siblings, a brother, Navigius, and a sister whose name he never records. We know he had nieces and a nephew, but nothing significant to our concerns. You can't have one saint do it all. So how about his parents? I want you to think about your parents, or the parental substitute who raised you. If your children are adults, you can think about your children. Conjure up their faces, their talents, their particular quirks. Pick the one, mentally, for whom you have the fondest feelings, just for the exercise we're going to do. Is this person your friend? Can this person ever be your friend? To answer the question, let's go back to the kinds of friendships you can have. Friendships of pleasure, utility, true virtue friendships. Is your parent a friend of pleasure? Do you feel really good every time you're around mom, dad? If your answer is no, that's okay. There's no friendship of pain to balance friendship of pleasure. You don't need to be and perhaps cannot be a friend to your parents right now. If you answered yes, I ask you to look at that pleasure. Is it simply a warm feeling? If it gives you pleasure to the point that you prefer your parents' companionship over all others, you might not be here. You might not have gone away to school. Is your parent making you a better person? Are you reciprocating as an equal? Can you even be an equal of your parents now? Is your parent a friend of utility? The parent-child relationship has historically been one of utility. Children find their parents useful, but that does not make a relationship of friendship any more than a relationship with a teacher or someone who makes your bed for pay at a B&B, although you may have kind feelings about these people. The mutuality of friendship is not there. Now that's okay. What about true friendship? The classical friendship of equals who have the mutual regard for one another, do for one another, criticize one another when warranted. Parent-children relationships don't usually fall into this category, not at least while the children are dependent. Perhaps you cannot be a friend to your parent at this stage in your life, but will it ever be possible? Perhaps Augustine and his friends show us some models of the parent-child relationship. We know nothing about them except what he tells us about them. So think about your parents. What if the world only knew what you said about them? Would it be accurate? Would it be true? It might depend on what you're actually trying to do when you're talking about your parents. Maybe you want to evoke sympathy. My parents are so cruel. They never let me fill in the blank. Or you want to explain yourself. My parents have made me what I am today, warped or good. Or maybe you're just trying to make your friends feel at home. You know, come to my house. My mom makes the world's best pancakes. So we have to take Augustine's characterizations of his parents with a proverbial grain of salt. However, we should remember, first, that he wrote about his parents in the Confessions, which is when he's a mature person after his conversion. Second, the Confessions are a prayer, a long prayer directed to God. And if lying is a sin, and lying in the face of God unthinkable, perhaps we can glean something from Augustine about his parents. So I want you to apply Augustine's relationships with what you know about his philosophical grid of friendship. So here we go. His parents are Patricius and Monica. His father's probably quite a bit older than his mother, the usual arrangements in a Roman-era marriage. Augustine tells us he had some wealth, but not a great deal. You know, he had to take this gap year because his father ran out of money. And his father could draw on his relationship, not friendly relationship, but a client-patron relationship to get Augustine tuition money. Augustine's masculinity and his schooling were of great importance to his father. He seemed to have invested in Augustine more than his brother or sister, a project that was going to make for familial upward mobility. In this sense, Augustine was useful to his father and vice versa. But I don't think it would be a true sense of friendship. Augustine was, for his father, a tool for the advancement of the family, an advancement he did not live to see. He died when Augustine was 17. So much for developing an adult relationship. Sometimes modern parents fit this to some degree, especially helicopter parents. They want to make sure everything goes right for their fragile daughter or son. So the child will grow up to have money and success. And so they, like Augustine's parents, steer their children toward specific majors in hope of lucrative careers. Know anyone like this? I want to be a classics major, but my parents. I want to be a theology major, but my parents. I was a Latin major. What can I say? No parent deliberately sets up their children for failure, but the instrumentality of the relationship often precludes a friendship of any sort, even utility. Augustine's relationship with his mother is much more complex, and even given the fact that the literary Monica is largely a character created by Augustine, one to manifest his progressive rebirths as a better person, we can understand something about the mother-son relationship that might be useful. Like her husband, Monica was concerned for her son's future. Apparently, she concurred with his plans for the son. She may have even forced him to give up his companion of 15 years, the mother of his only son, so he could enter into a socially advantageous marriage for him and his family. And this is when Sonny Boy is 32 years old. You know, you might think by this time, Mom had backed off. Now, it would be an injustice to see Monica as simply a conniving mother who used her son only to advance the family's fortune. Monica was also a pious Christian. Like many pious mothers at the time, she did not have her child baptized. She considered it spiritually prudent to put it off until her son was ready to settle down, because confession and penance were real ordeals in antiquity, and she wanted to make sure he was finished with serious sin. Yet she was relentless in his support for his spiritual life. She encouraged him not to have relationships with married women. Apparently single ones were okay. When he was 17 and joined the Manichees, she threw him out of the house. Tough love for the good of his soul. Later, she relented again for the good of his soul. She may have been a good influence on him, but he wasn't ready to accept any good influence. He snuck off and went from Africa to Italy, but she followed him to Milan and then to Rome. She encouraged his interest in philosophy, an interest that was a gateway for his conversion. After his conversion, but before his actual baptism, Augustine and his friends retreated to a villa owned by a family patron. They lived there for a while and regularly discussed philosophical subjects. Here we see a surprising move in his relationship with his mother. What one would have expected is this. Augustine and his friends are all in this little dialogues on philosophy, and Monica, if she's at all present, oh, she's making dinner, she's filling up their glasses, maybe she's taking care of her grandchild Alypius. On the contrary, Augustine tells us that she was a willing and wise participant in their philosophical dialogues. You know, it's a funny thing. The older your parents get, the wiser they get. The more they seem to know. Are they learning, or are you discovering that what they knew all along, you're now finding out they knew? Augustine discovered this about his mother. His compliment to her was, quote, "She had a weak body of a woman, but the strong faith of a man." Now, this is not my idea of a compliment, but in antiquity it was. The closer Augustine approached baptism, and the more he trod the Christian path after baptism, the more we see a closeness between Augustine and Monica. The more, too, we see the development of her spiritual life. While they were living in Italy, she had always maintained that she wanted to go back to Africa and be buried there. She had an attachment to her homeland, not the true homeland of Christians, which is heaven, but to North Africa. After Augustine's conversion, she came to the conclusion that where she was buried didn't really matter, and Augustine rejoiced in his mother's spiritual development. Before she died, Augustine and his mother stood overlooking the harbor at Rome's port city of Ostia. They engaged in conversation about things spiritual. Some people even think that they shared a mystic experience. Could it be that mother and son had become spiritual equals in each other's eyes? People who were concerned about each other's spiritual and eternal welfare. Their conversation ends with the words of the gospel and a vision of heaven. "Come, share the joy of your Lord." And Augustine believed that in just a few days, that is what she did when she died. Conclusion. Recall here what Augustine said about a disordered friendship in his life. "No friends are true friends unless you, my God, bind them fast to one another." Were Augustine and his mother true friends? They certainly cared for each other, worked for the best for each other, and the happy life of the philosophers for the truly happy eternal life. These were no friendships of pleasure or utility. Perhaps it was the true friendship of the philosophers, one brought to a new height by the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. Best friends forever, for eternity. Can we have that friendship, that true friendship with our parents, or if you're a parent, with your children? Can we have it with our peers? As you leave this evening, I ask you to consider once again those whom you consider your best friends, the ones whose faces you recalled at the very beginning of the lecture. Are they your true friends? If they are, keep them. If they or you are not being true friends, but want to be, consider how to cultivate the best in them. And let them cultivate the best in you. If no friends are true friends, yet pray that God may bind you fast to one another through the love which is sown in your hearts by the Holy Spirit. That's it. I hope you realize that it's very intimidating for me, because I work on the Donatists, Augustine's opponents, to be giving a lecture on Augustine's home turf. So, questions? Concerns? In the back?
I suppose Augustine foresaw the possibility that we could become friends with him through his text.
Ah.
The special kind of friendship made possible between author and reader.
Okay. The question is, can we be friends with Augustine through his texts? Can you have a friendship with readers? One of the things that I did not talk about, that if I had 2 hours I might have, is Augustine's idea that friendship does not have to be reciprocal. True friendship. You can wish the best and work the best for someone who cannot, for whatever reason, reciprocate. So, in a sense, by providing the Confessions, Augustine reaches out across the ages through God and this work to the possibility of friendship. When people wrote in antiquity, even if they wrote private letters from one person to another, the expectation is these would circulate. So when Augustine wrote to Proba or whoever, it was not like, it's like now, you just push that button and it's reply to all, or you can send something out. So it's possible that Augustine would have considered the possibility of friendship with others through writing. And there are many occasions in his letters when he talks about letters that for good or ill someone copied and sent to someone else. Yes?
When cultivating friendships through conversation, how would Augustine go about from a conversation on a superficial level and then bring it down to a more meaningful level?
Okay, the question is how to go from a superficial level to a more meaningful level in a conversation. I think that here, Augustine and his friends, and Augustine and his companions, acquaintances, people he knew, were a much smaller circle than we have today. Even though he's running around from place to place on preaching tours, he has the opportunity to spend time with people at the dinner table and to capitalize on shared concerns. And you can see this if you read Augustine's letters, that he'll start out a little formal, but recall all the things that people have in common before he reaches up to that higher level of friendship in the letters. So I would say look at his letters, which are now have really good translations. That'll give you a few points on how you might want to cultivate your acquaintances or companions into real friends. Other questions? Peter?
What might Augustine say are the biggest obstacles that we today face about friendship? He obviously doesn't know us today, but if he were to turn our thoughts, turn our attention to some kinds of things that might be big trouble, what might they be?
Oh, as a historian, I'm always careful about hypothetical counterfactuals. But I think the one thing that struck me as I was doing this research for this paper was an article in the Chronicle of Higher Education that talked about superficiality. If you are friends with everybody, you don't have the time or the energy to invest on learning that person enough to be a good friend to him or her. So I would say it's spreading yourself too thin. It's one thing to check the little box and say, I'm friending you, but don't let that keep the word friend from having a truer and deeper meaning. Maybe as you check that, you want to say in your mind, people I know, acquaintances, maybe even companions, but maybe not friends yet. Maybe there's the hope for friendship, and I think that's one of the singular things about Augustine, is that he always has a hope for true friendship if there's room for God there. So I would say first, superficiality, and secondly, inattention to the best for the person that's promoted by thinking about the person in the face of God. And it may be a weird exercise to think about God and your friend, but try it. Yes?
My question is about what you just said, actually, so I'm glad you're bringing it up now. it seems like in your talk, and I think you're right about this, how much of friendship, real friendship, is really up to me, and how much of it is grace?
Okay, how much friendship is up to you and how much is grace? I think there the answer is let go and let God. If you have reached out to someone and there's no uptake, you can still wish that person well and do for them as much as you can do for them. And sometimes there's things you can't do for them that they need because you're you and they're them, and you have to hope and pray that someone else will be in a relationship with them that's a reciprocal, friending relationship. But I think Augustine would have said, in the sight of God, you can be a friend even when there is not that reciprocation. You can pray for that person and be a friend to the degree that you can in a grace situation. And if that's not the kind of friendship God wants you to have with that person, that's up to God. Yes, in the back.
Now, what about those who tend to reject friendship in general, or like going on the same lines? Those who not only don't seek friendship, but just actively reject it. What would be in that case?
What about the person who actively rejects friendship? Sometimes we call those people narcissists. People for whom their world is their world, and they don't, not only do they think they don't need, but they don't want anyone else. I would say you can pray for that person. You can stand by the person so that when that person is ready to mature, to accept the companionship and the friendship, and maybe the best friendship, you'll be there to support the person to the degree that you can, and to the degree that that person can accept at that time. There's only so much you can do to cultivate a mutual friendship. There's always more you can do to cultivate a friendship in God where you can pray for that person and encourage maybe someone else, not you, but maybe someone else who can approach that person in a way that that person can accept. In the back again?
Why can't true friendship exist without God?
Pardon me?
Sorry, I have a cold. Why can't true friendship exist without God?
Augustine, why can true friendship not exist without God? For Augustine, it's only in the sense that God knows all things, and God has created individual persons for their true end. If they were to pursue some other end, they would not be going along the same path. And it would be a path that would not be a path of true virtue. Now, there's some controversy, if you're reading The City of God, about whether virtue can be a non-Christian virtue, whether you can think about virtue that doesn't have God as its true end. Augustine, I think, would tend to say that the people who don't have God in their relationship at some level have something that is less than a true friendship, because it's not ordered toward being best friends forever in eternal life. So it's a matter of goals, the better goal or the lesser goal, and he's hesitant about wanting to put out for public consumption of friendship that's not as good as some other higher form of friendship. But I don't think he would have rejected, say, the classical examples of friendship as totally worthless. So, good question. Yes?
You said St. Augustine based a lot on hope, like for example, hope for a friendship. Now, can somebody be a best friend, fall off the best friend because X or Y reason? And then is there still hope for that friendship to come up to that level of best friends once again?
Can a friendship tend to fall apart and then come back? Is that?
But like to the extent where you're best friends, like for life, and then it comes back down to nothing. Can it come back up to that level?
Can it come back up to the level of best friends after slipping out? I think a lot will depend on what happens in the lives of the two people. I know for some people who are friends in high school or college, and for whatever reason the friendship falls apart, there comes a point in later years when they want something more and they go back and start to page through their yearbook and think about that and actually reach out to the other person. And if the other person is in a situation where they're mature and ready to come back to rediscover the good and maybe take the good of the friendship to the next level, it would be possible. I can say, at my age, there are people I was friends with as an undergrad, didn't see them for the longest time, they were kind of companions, and that was it. And in the last 10, 15 years, they have become real friends. So, yeah. I think a lot depends on the psychosocial development of both persons. Where are you in life? What are you really valuing? So, yeah, there might be hope. Yes?
You mentioned that Augustine was, back in the ancient times, people were born into many different restrictions, and Augustine found the importance of friendship because he had the power to choose them. Mm-hmm. But in defining what it means to be a friend of virtue, to reach that kind of perfect friendship, you still have to go through these lower levels. So doesn't that kind of restrict what kind of friends we can make, because similarities must still exist, such as like living in the same city or same restrictions like that. So I was wondering how much of power we actually have to choose friends.
Okay, how can we choose friends when we have all these social restrictions of where you live and your social set? If we're talking about the present or the past, let's start with the past. People in antiquity had some mobility. Augustine's a good example. With the help of friends and patrons, he moves from Sucarrás, Tagaste, which is a kind of backwater town even today. He goes to Madara, which is bigger. He goes to Carthage to school. He winds up going to Milan and to Rome. Milan especially was a seat of power. People did have some mobility, especially people in upper classes or people who were supported by the upper classes. In that respect, they were meeting new people. They did have some opportunities. How do we? I think the older you get, the more you have exposure to a larger number of people, and the more you can spot people for whom you're going to have some affinity. You have a restricted social set when you're in your high school, if your high school's small. Villanova's big, but not huge. One of my daughters went to school at a place where it's really huge. I've taught at schools that are like 3 to 4 times larger than this. You have to be really careful not to get overwhelmed by all these people and shut yourself off, saying, I can't deal with this. That's why many larger schools and even corporations will have social events that try to bring together people on the same team so that friendship, which will be of some use to the corporation, will be developing. And you have the opportunity, if you belong to professional associations. That's how I met Father Allen, in a professional association. And many of my friends come through professional associations where you do have that choice. You see people who go to the same conferences, and there are possibilities. Yes? Pardon?
We have the idea of these different types of friendship. Did Augustine have any idea, as we might, that these are not mutually exclusive types of friendship, but that all of these three functions overlap, and that indeed a mature friendship needs to go through the earlier stages to build the safe area of safety and trust on which these things can grow? Do we need to see them as mutually exclusive for him?
To answer that well, I think I would have to go read letter 155 again. But I think that there would be room for development, for constant overlap. I would think that Augustine would see, if you had reached some sort of a virtuous friendship, to slide backwards would be a problem. But a friendship of utility is not necessarily completely excluded by a friendship of virtue, because in Aristotle's discussion of friendships of utility, he talks about mutual duties. And certainly a person who is a friend of virtue would see it as a duty to cultivate friendship in the other person. So I wouldn't want to make them airtight categories. Certainly there is pleasure, in a sense, in a friend of true virtue, but not the kind of pleasure that has this negative sense of, oh, it feels good and that's all it is. Okay. All right.
Thank you, Maureen.
And thank you for the good questions.